And we are live. Welcome to those of you who just got your notification that we are about to kick off this continuing webinar series on digital marketing within the franchise space. And we are so excited to have, it's actually a guest speaker that had previously joined one of our WooRank webinars, and it was such a hit. We had to have him on for a True Presence webinar. So we are going to be jumping into all of this fantastic content in just a minute here. We're going to give everyone another minute or so to grab your coffee, get settled in. If you are just now logging in, if you want to drop in the comments where you are logging in from, that would be wonderful. We would love to know. We have two different time zones represented in our speakers right now, which is not too bad. Usually we have even some, global reach with our guest speakers. So today is just, Pacific time, and I believe Central. Mercer will be calling in from. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get our faces on the screen here. All right, we are real people. There we are. So I'm going to pass this over to Mercer and Jeremy. If real quickly you could give us a quick intro to who you are, what you do, and then we'll jump right into it.
Awesome, Victoria. Thank you so much. Mercer, thanks for being here. I'll just do a quick intro myself. I'm Jeremy LaDuque. I have been working in digital my whole career since 1999, and then I started working with franchise systems in 2006 on everything from digital marketing to website management to now all the way up to GA4. So, and I'll be putting this hat on a lot today. I was a franchisee of Sport Clips for 5.5 years. Actually, just sold that, and but excited to be here with Mercer, Chris Mercer, because Chris is an outright expert in GA4, and everybody knows in the franchise space that I've been talking to everybody about Google Analytics and moving to 4 and what are the benefits and how do you get started. And I really am thrilled to have you, Mercer, because I've seen some of your other webinars. You get right down into the weeds of it, which is great. And as we've talked, I'm excited to pick your brain as a franchisor and a franchisee about how we can leverage it for these multi-location businesses that we've been talking about.
Outstanding. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it because that is the trick. And just as an FYI for everybody watching, we have until July 1st, at which point, whatever you're using as your current Google Analytics, the older, what they call the universal analytics, stops working. So we all need to move into GA4 if you're going to continue using Google Analytics anyway, which is the whole point of obviously this particular training. All right, so now we've got our slide live. You should be seeing the rethinking measurement with Google Analytics 4, the big purple slide. So I figured, a lot of people feel like this when it comes to their Google Analytics, that they jump off this horse and they just get kicked right off of it. Sometimes it feels like you've been kicked in the head and you're just tired of arguing with this platform and you want to just move on. So if that's happened to you, we're going to cover some of the reasons why that happens. And if it hasn't happened to you, we're going to cover some of the things that you can do to make sure it doesn't as we go through this. One of the big things that we talk about in all of our trainings, as Jeremy had mentioned, we do go into the weeds a little bit. For me, I don't want to just show you what's possible. I want to teach you something so you can actually take some action today and change how you are doing something. Because if you just see a webinar, you've been exposed to new information. But if you don't have a skill from that you can practice, you're never going to actually improve anything. You just be exposed to a bunch of information. We don't need more information. We need more action. So when it comes to the one thing, the particular slides, just focus on one new idea. Don't try to pick up on every little thing we've done here. Just pick up on the thing that is you're more likely to take action on. Then take action on that, practice that. Then you can come back, rewatch this, and you will pick up another new one thing, because at that point, you're coming at it with a different set of eyes, a different set of skills, and you'll pick up even more as we go through. This is one of those workshops that just keeps on giving. All right, so in terms of what to expect, we're going to keep it fairly focused. So first, we're going to start with kind of a measurement mindset, because this is where things go wrong. People they don't think about measurement properly, and they dive into the tools too fast. So we're going to talk about that. We're then going to talk about the framework, a strategy when it comes to measurement, no matter what tool you're using, that will help you get more out of those tools. Then we'll move into, okay, let's start talking about GA4 and giving it some context as to why Google is making us do this. And then we'll, of course, finish up with going through a tour of Google Analytics 4 and answering any questions that anybody's got. You just pop those in chat as we go. And Jeremy and I will be going through as we go. Quick origin story for myself. I started teaching WordPress way back in the day. It was sort of my entry in a digital career. My background is mostly sales and marketing. So when I started teaching WordPress sites, that very quickly led to people saying, hey, this is great, but it's a lot of work. Can you just build my WordPress site for me? So we started doing that. But as an entrepreneur, I wanted to differentiate our agency from others. So we said, hey, we're going to build your WordPress site and we will optimize the site for you, right? Which gave us recurring income, but also gave us a differentiator. We were optimizing things. Well, in order to optimize, you have to measure. And that's where measurement comes in. And the rest, as they say, is history. We got really good at that, sort of. So the real aha for us was that it wasn't about the tools. We thought it was too, like everybody else. We thought it was like, oh, we're going to use Google Analytics and we're going to use it in a different way that is unique or more improved or more useful. And that's what we're going to teach. It's all about the tool, the tool, the tool, the tool, the tool. But it's not about the tool. It's about the mindset we have before we even look at all these different tools. So here's what I mean by that. If you look at this picture, and this is not a trick question, I'm not a big believer in trick questions, right? What's going on here? It's just a simple conversation between a couple of people, right? What about this? Same thing, simple conversation between a couple of people. What about this? Same thing, simple conversation about a couple of people. But here's the next question. What exactly is a conversation? Well, a conversation is really just listening and responding, ideally, right? Somebody's listening to somebody and they're thinking about, how they're going to respond. And then they are adjusting how they respond to keep the conversation going and vice versa. Both parties are doing that. If you and I were in the same room, we would be doing that. It's natural human behavior. This whole listening and responding thing makes a ton of sense. When you think about a transaction sort of conversation like this, they're still listening and responding. That salesperson is coming in, you're walking into your store. In this case, the customer probably said something like, hey, I'm trying to improve my swing, I'm looking for a new driver. And the salesperson walked over to the drivers. If that person had said, hey, I'm looking for a really nice golf cap, that person would be over by the golf cap, showing them golf caps. They would adjust what they're doing based upon what that prospect is asking for, right? Based upon the behaviors that prospect's giving. It's just listening and responding. And again, this is not rocket science. It's how humans work, right? Listening and responding. However, what about this? This is where humans lose their minds because we go into this digital world and we think, oh, digital's different. Digital is a brand new way. Digital's complete. All the rules are different. And it's not at all true. Why? Because humans created digital. So it's all based on human behaviors that's coming through here. And I promise you, there is a conversation that's happening between this user and that website. You've done this. When you go to a different website, you probably hear the conversation in your head because you're sub-vocalizing as you're reading through it. So there is a conversation happening. Only now it's not a human in front of this person. It's not a human to human. It's a website to human, or it's an app to human if you're using apps. But there is that listening and responding. Okay. But if it's a website, if it's an app, how do we listen? We can't really do that, can we? Because we can't physically be there, which I admit we can't, but we still have a conversation happening. So how do we listen to that side of the conversation? That is what measurement is for. So hopefully that's already a one thing type of thing of like, wow, I never thought about using measurement for that. The better you get at measurement, the more likely you are to hear their side of the conversation clearer, right? And if you think about it, if I was 1,000 feet away talking, you wouldn't be able to hear it. But as you get closer, you can start to make out some words. As you get even closer, it becomes clearer. Think about that with measurement. The better you get at measurement, you start hearing a few mumbles, you start making out some words, and then eventually you can hear complete sentences. It's like that, right? It's a process of listening to their side of the conversation. Okay, well then how do we respond? That's where marketing comes in. Marketing is how we respond because we can't be there, but our marketing is, our websites are. So we change that. We change the headlines. We change the offers. We change our audience targeting, right? We're changing the marketing to keep the conversation going, ideally, in the direction we want it to go. So that's really it. And that's how measurementmarketing.io, our company, actually got its name because it's all about measurement, which is listening, and then marketing, which is how to respond to keep the conversation going in the proper direction. So when you think about this, remember there is a conversation going on. And then in your companies, in your teams, that should be a question you're asking is, are we listening to the conversation? A, what is the conversation? Start asking that. And then are we listening for it? How do we know that the website is having the conversation we want it to have? Or if we're not doing that, then we're just crossing our fingers and we're hoping. And that's not a great place to be. right? So that's why we listen to the conversation with measurement. That's also why measurement, again, kind of finishing out this tail end of mindset stuff, it's why measurement is a department now in organizations. It's no longer just a project. And years ago, that's how people thought about it. It made sense. It's like, oh, I'm going to set up some goals in Google Analytics and then my measurement's done. Or I'm going to get somebody to create a dashboard for me and my measurement is done. I just use that forever. Gone. Those days don't exist anymore. Measurement is way too complicated, way too many tools. And you've got to try to figure out how to listen to the conversation, which is constantly changing because you're tweaking it all the time to keep it the right direction. You need measurement in your organization as a department. It needs resources, it needs training, it needs time, it needs focus. And the better you are at measurement, they start becoming your oracle, which I'll show you a little bit later on. They'll start to be able to tell you how things are going to work next week, which sounds like a strong claim, but it's absolutely true. You'll see how as we go through the rest of this. So with that, kind of a one thing check. And Jeremy, obviously, if you want to go in anything here, we can. But think about that. Are we listening to the conversation? Are we using measurement to do that? And then are we thinking about measurement as a project, or is it a department organization that can get resources and grow as we learn new tools like GA4 and BigQuery and everything else that's coming out that will help us with this particular process?
Well, that's great. I love it. The mindset. I think most franchises wish they had a department for measurement.
Everybody's playing catch up.
Yeah.
They're not alone.
Yeah.
Believe me, there's a lot of organizations that don't, but it is a big trend right now.
Yeah, I think they're lucky if they have a person who can focus in on measurement. But there's a lot of franchise systems who are starting to realize, you see, I mean, in franchising, when you're small, you're doing a lot of things yourself, but you're also relying on a lot of vendors, right? So you have multiple vendors providing you all this information and data. As you get bigger as a franchise and your marketing fund gets larger because you're rolling up more dollars from more franchisees, you are able to start to hire within and build in both situations. Though it's interesting, and we'll talk about this later when it makes more sense when we're actually in GA4. But there's a big trend going on right now in franchising where franchises realize, I got to stop relying on each vendor to provide me and then try to understand it. I really need to own measurement myself. And I think that speaks exactly to what you're talking about in terms of a mindset, is you've got to own it. If it's a department, if it's a person, you have to own your measurement. You can't keep just relying on different folks or companies or vendors sending you reports and then you analyze those reports as best you can. You've got to own it. So
yeah, that's exactly right. And I think to your point, as we move on into the kind of the strategy side, there are a lot of vendors that essentially we've outsourced measurement to, but really they're not doing measurement. They're just providing us a bunch of data. And that's what happens a lot. And it's because we're focusing too much sometimes on the vendor, and the vendor's focusing sometimes too much on the tools, not necessarily the strategies, because they don't sometimes know these strategies. So let's talk a little bit about that, because it addresses it when we talk about tool versus trade. So and this just kind of sets the context for it. If I can only boil an egg, like that's the epitome of my skills when it comes to cooking, is I can boil an egg pretty well, but that's it. Anything else, I'm done. And I want to learn how to become a chef. I could spend forever watching a bunch of YouTube videos on how to be a better chef and all the different techniques, and watch all the different networks and all the Food Network shows that are out there and watch all those and learn. And I can look at that and I can make a very serious error, which happens all the time. And the serious error I might make is I see why this particular person is a really good chef. If I had those pans, if I had that equipment, if I had that kitchen, right, with all that fancy stuff, that would make me a great chef. But what happens is if I invest all that money into doing all that stuff, I buy all those fancy tools, I still just boil an egg with them. And that's because I never learned how to become a chef. I never learned the strategies that a chef knows. I didn't know how to combine ingredients. I didn't know about flavors and profiles and all that stuff. And if you think about it, you can get a really good chef, somebody who knows how to cook. I can give them a camper stove, a really bad tool, and they'll make amazing meals from it because they have a good strategy. And so that's why when it comes to tool versus the trade, it's important to understand measurement. Even if you're outsourcing it to vendors, in-house, you got to learn how to use it as a strategy, because you can't rely on them having their strategies for you, right? So let's talk a little bit about what that is. I'm going to give you a framework. Everybody can use this now with whoever they're outsourcing their measurement to. You can use this framework existing, even if you're not using GA4 right now. So really 3 simple steps to this. And whenever I build frameworks, I'm a big systems guy because it's like, it just relates to my inner lazy person. I think the lazier I get, the more efficient I get. So systems are what I use to do that. And so what I like to design is simple systems that get me from point A to point B just by taking the actions in the system without anything else necessary. So what's point A in this case? Most marketers are marketing in the blind if they think about it. And what I mean by that is there's a whole lot of guessing going on. So it could be like, hey, I'm looking at my numbers and I don't know what it is. It's not good. So let's try something. Let's try to do the headline. Let's try to change the price. Let's try to change our audience. Let's try TikTok now. Everyone's doing TikTok. Let's try TikTok now. Or it's professional guessing, where I'm joining industry groups where everybody else looks at my numbers and they all guess for me with their ideas and suggestions, but they're still just guessing. Everyone's just guessing. What we're really trying to do is produce this result of an improved metric, something measurable. What for most of us, that's going to be revenue and profits, right? We want more revenue and profits. So what we're doing is we're trying to build a system to follow a series of steps, where as long as we continue to follow those steps over and over again, more than likely, we're going to produce the result we want just as a symptom of that process. So the symptom we're trying to get here is more revenue and profits, right? So we don't have to swing for it. It's just going to be produced as we go through. As with all things, it's not the what, but it's the how. So the what's pretty easy. We got to plan out the measurement, we build out our measurement, and then we use our measurement. But it's how we do that that is the secret sauce. So the way to think about this is you break it down first into your measurement plan. And we think about, okay, what are the questions that we're trying to ask? And for us, we always talk about results and how questions. That's the only 2 types of questions there are. Please don't overcomplicate this. That is going to be the tendency, because everybody's like, what's an important question? Am I asking the right questions? I don't know. Let's go to Google. And then let's type in, what questions should a franchisor be asking? What questions should a franchisee be asking? And there's a billion blog posts with hundreds of questions that you should be at. And you're like, I don't even know what to do with this. And you get overwhelmed. There's only ever 2. There's results questions and how questions. This is important because it relates to sort of the mindset. We're trying to listen to the conversation. We want to be able to hear that, right? Their side of the conversation to see if it's the right conversation they should be having. So what we're asking questions around is, what is the result of a journey? Let's consider the user journeys. We all have user journeys. There's a brand user journey that introduces them to the brand. There's a product or service user journey for specific products or services. There might be a specific user journey you have for specific promotions that you're running. So we all have these user journeys. When did they finish the user journey? That's the result. And everyone's probably already doing that. How many leads did I get? How many people walked in the door? How many people bought the product or service, right? That's the result side of things. How would the average ticket? How many units did we sell? All that sort of stuff. Results of a journey. The more important questions, those are still important. You have to ask them. But the more important questions are, how did we get there? So what are the steps necessary in order to get to those? In other words, what are those micro conversion points that lead to the conversion that we all care about? But a conversion is a conversion. It's still necessary to move through those stages. So you list out all the results questions, and then you list out your how questions, right? How are they getting there? And for those of you who are like, yeah, but I still don't know if I'm doing it right. I promise you, if you just start doing results and how questions, the next time you will be better, because you've already practiced it. The next time after that, you've practiced it twice. Guess what? You're going to be a little bit better. And then you start building momentum as you go. So just start with the results and how. Then we think about, okay, now I have my questions. How will I collect that information? In other words, what information, what behaviors are necessary for me to collect in order to get those answers? So using digital components for now, because that's what we're talking about with GA4, I might be, okay, I'm doing a coupon offer or a lead offer where I'm collecting new leads. So what's my opt-in rate? Great question, right? So what will I need for the opt-in rate? What's the information? What are the behaviors that I need to measure for? I have to measure when they're on the page to become an opt-in, when they have the potential to become an opt-in, where I'm making that offer. And I need to measure when they become an opt-in, when they've either the thank you page, the fulfillment page, the success form, whatever it is that says they have completely done this. When I know those 2 numbers, I can divide them out, figure out my conversion rate. Okay, fine. Now I know what information I need to measure for. This is the secret sauce out of all of this step here. This is this do not skip this key, because it solves a lot of problems in organizations. Actions. So before we look at our spreadsheets, before we open up GA4, before we look at a single dashboard or report, we're already thinking about, okay, I'm going to ask this question about opt-in rate. Here's how I'm going to collect the information to get that answer for an opt-in rate. What actions will I take? Well, here's how you think about this. You have to have a less than, a greater than, and a just right answer. Think like Goldilocks and the 3 bears. So I believe the opt-in rate should be between 25 and 35% for this particular campaign. Great. What will you do if it's less than 25%? Well, if it's less than 25%, I'm going to look at the targeting of the email because maybe the audience is too cold or it's old, or I might look at the offer on the page. Maybe they're coming to the page, but they don't like the offer. So I might adjust those things. Okay, fine. Perfectly fine. What if it's higher than 35%? Well, if it's higher than 35%, which people think weird, like why would a conversion rate that's too high be bad? Well, it might. Let's say the conversion rate was at 65% opt-in rate. On the one hand, that sounds great, but I would hesitate. And I would say, well, that sounds like you have a really hot audience who's opting in. So maybe you can scale out that audience a little bit. So you can broadcast more, you can reach more. Your opt-in rate will drop, of course, back in range, but you'll net more leads, right? As we should. So it's like, oh, okay, that's what I'll do. Great. And what if it's just right? What if it's between 25 and 35%? Well, in that case, I'm going to continue to scale out the traffic where I can, and then add in maybe other traffic sources to see if I can replicate that result and ultimately gain more leads. So all of that thinking that goes into the planning process is necessary for the build. Because when I go through that action step, I've done two things. One, I eliminated measurement for measurement's sake, which is horrible. It happens everywhere. Big data is going to get people in big trouble because it's quickly becoming a liability. The more laws that are coming out, the US is definitely going to come out with a law in the next few years, more than likely. California's already got one. Utah's got one. There's all laws. We already know about GDPR internationally, right? It's going to be a problem that you have the data. So any data you have, you should have a purpose for, right? So when you're thinking about the action step, if you can't figure out an action for it, I would suggest you don't need to measure it. And if those of you that are thinking, yeah, but I want to measure stuff because I don't know if I'm going to ask a question about it in the future, measure it when you're ready. Because otherwise, you're going to measure for measurement's sake. You're going to collect it in a way that it's not useful. And it's like throwing a bunch of data in the garage. We all have those boxes when we move from house to house to house that we've never unpacked, but we keep moving them from house to house to house. That's every company's data. It's what they call dark data, in fact. And about 90% of organizations, or 90% of the data in organizations, they don't even use. And they have forgotten they even had it. So don't even worry about it. When the time is right, you collect it. So it's useful for you. So that's the measurement plan phase. When you have your plan, then you move into your platform, whatever the tools are. Could be a vendor, could be GA4, doesn't matter. Whatever the plan or the platform is that you're using to measure things, you want to make sure that it understands what results you're trying to get. Now, the little secret component to this is ACE. So we talk about, you want to, again, think about user journey, right? Remember results and how user journey, listening to the conversation, you start to see how these are overlapping. So we think about ACE in terms of, are we measuring when they're aware of that user journey? Are we measuring when they completed that user journey? And then are we measuring as they engage with the user journey? Why are we measuring for all those different results? So we can start to see the drop off. So we can start to see where that user journey is kind of having the conversations going south. And we go, oh, right here is where we're losing them. We need to focus on this part, right? If we're not measuring for that, as a result, we can't see it. So that's why you measure for that. In GA4, the terminology would be a conversion event. So we just set up a conversion for that. Now you focus on your traffic. So many of you familiar with Google Analytics are probably already using UTMs. That is how you would have to do it with GA4. They all come across the same way, but it's twofold. One is using UTMs to measure for all that different stuff. And again, if the first time you've ever heard about UTMs, just Google UTMs and Google Analytics. You'll see a billion blog posts that tell you all about it, a bunch of YouTube videos. But the idea is that they tag in and they sort of identify, right? And so the way that we do it is we make those UTMs, they sort of have a purpose. They're like, hey, I am from Facebook. I am paid traffic, right? And then we call it the who, what, and why. Who are you? What type of traffic are you sending me? What's the point? Why are you here? I am Facebook. I am bringing over paid traffic. This person is from this audience. They are for this user journey. They should be accomplishing this result. And now it starts tying traffic to the result that you're supposed to get from that traffic. So now you have that. Then you go through and you start to look for a story in your platform. So like GA4, this is what we call a setup, but you would have to go through and actually start to understand how to use the tool, right? Which obviously we can get into today. But you do need to take training on understanding how to use this tool so that all the traffic attribution is intact. And if you have to do cross-domain or any other crazy stuff you do with data streams and everything else, just to make sure that that story is connected. Which traffic source causes which result? Because you start to see personalities appear. And as an example, you might find Google Organic is amazing for awareness for this journeys. It's horrible for getting people in the door. Facebook retargeting is great for getting people in the door and looking around, but no one's really buying anything, but they are becoming leads. Okay, fine. Emails get them to show up and buy something that day. And now you start to understand how to use Google Organic, how to use Facebook retargeting, how to use your emails. And more importantly, you can start to forecast that, which we'll talk about in a second, to make sure they're working the way they are. In other words, you're adjusting your conversation to keep the conversation going, just using strategy. So that's at this point of your build, you're measuring for the results, ACE results, aware, complete, and engage of each journey. You've got your traffic identifying who, what, and why. And then you've got that natural story starting to appear. At that point, we use our measurement system, right? However we're using it, in the GA4 platform, in a Tableau or Looker Studio report or a spreadsheet, doesn't matter. But what you're doing is the first thing you want to do is, great, what's the conversation? That's what we're listening for, right? Of course we have to listen to the conversation. It's got to be a key to this. So we're going to listen to the conversation. All we're doing here is looking at the trends and patterns. And this is a really big key point when it comes to measurement. Measurement is a directional tool. It is not, repeat, not an accurate tool. Every time I say the A word, right? We actually do call it the A word at measuremarketing.io. I do not like saying accurate. I have to force myself to say accurate or accuracy because they do not exist. They are a myth that marketers refuse to let go. Accuracy does not exist. You don't need accuracy. What you need is consistency in your measurement. So it doesn't matter if Facebook and GA4 don't agree on how many transactions happened. What matters if both of them say they doubled. That's what matters. The trends are in agreement. If Facebook says sales doubled and GA4 says sales got cut in half, that's a problem. There's an implementation issue there because the trends aren't agreeing. But remember, when it comes to listening, it's the truth is in the trend, the power is in the pattern. That's all you're looking for. And if you have that, you can do amazing things with it. You can take actions. So how do we take actions? Well, first we know these trends and patterns, right? Truth is in the trend, power is in the pattern. Then we measure against our forecasts. And this is a key that people miss all the time. Again, I think it's out of ignorance. They just haven't thought about it. Not that they can't do it. They just never thought about it. Most organizations are forensic marketers. They will always look back at what happened to it last week and go, what happened to that $1,000 we spent on Facebook? And they're always looking back in time. That's driving through the rearview mirror. If you think about it, you're always looking back. Well, if you're always looking back, you can't ever market forward. And the whole idea with the forecast is it changes how you're asking questions. So instead of saying, hey, what happened to that $10,000 we put on Facebook spend last week? You start asking, what's going to happen to the $10,000 we're about to spend next week? And think about the power of that question. What's going to happen at $10,000? And I, as a measurement professional, should be able to say, again, if I've got a well-resourced department, they should be able to tell you, well, we're going to spend 10 based on the CPMs. Let's say it's about $1 per click should come through. Of those clicks that come through, we expect about 35 to 40% to opt in for this offer. Within 7 days, the email series should then close them for this amount of money, which should create this much revenue within a 10-day framework. Cool. That's a forecast. Now, all you need to do is measure against that, because obviously you wouldn't even be able to make that forecast unless you're measuring for each of those stages. But when you measure against that, it automatically dumps you at the place that everybody's trying to get to, which is, what actions do I take? How do I optimize stuff? What should I change? The optimization becomes impossible to ignore because it's essentially going to dump you at the place where it's going to say, listen, better than average chance. If you focus on this lever in the forecast, here's where it's not quite working. Here's where the conversation is going south. If you change this piece or work with this piece, you're more than likely going to see that improved result. Of course, is what we're trying to get to, revenue and profits. So that's kind of the strategy, the framework overall as it goes. Now, I will say, when you're new to this, you got to give it time. It's a new skill for everybody when you're starting. It becomes very routine and a habit after a while. Again, the only difference between me and you watching this right now is I've done this thousands and thousands and thousands of times at this point. You are just starting out, but I was exactly where you were at one point. We're on the same path. I'm just further ahead because I've had more time to practice. But I've been there, so I get it. Give yourself 90 days to get used to this thing, going through it once, right? And as you optimize, you're going to have other questions. And then the whole thing just repeats itself over and over, and you cycle through. Every time you go through every step, you have to go through every step and every key. But every time you successfully complete that cycle, you've built more measurement muscle. As you build a little bit more measurement muscle, you're coming into the framework at a better level. So you start asking bigger questions. You can now, maybe you've learned some skills with GA4. You can collect more nuanced behaviors so you can get answers to bigger questions. And then you can take more detailed actions, right? Which the optimization steps, if you think about it, you're already sort of knowing what you're going to do in the optimization steps. So all of this starts, kind of building upon itself, but give yourself time to go through it. Don't try to do this today and, think, oh, I got to be perfect at it. You don't. Practice it. Now, if you have no clear roadmap, meaning you've got questions like people are saying, well, I don't even know what questions to ask, or we're not even sure what's important to measure, or we don't know if we're doing this right. That's poor planning. That's all that's happened. People skipped the planning process, go through each of these keys, and get your plan in place until you've got something that's clear that says, okay, here we know what we're measuring for. We know what we're going to do with it. We know why we're measuring for it. We know how we're going to measure it. Like that's the plan. At that point, you move into your build. Now, if you have chaotic reports, that could be a bunch of data and no story, a bunch of information and no action happening. It could be things like people are frustrated because the stakeholders keep coming to them saying, I just need to know this answer. And all they keep hearing is, it's in the report you already have, right? And you see stuff like that happen all the time. Again, that's because of poor planning, because nobody role played it with them. But let's say that happens with chaotic reports. If that's happening, it's because the build hasn't happened properly. You've turned on Google Analytics 4, let's say, but you've just activated it. It started filling with data, and then you tried to use it, but you didn't configure it. You didn't set up the results. You didn't set up your traffic to tell a story. So of course it's not telling you the story. Of course it looks like the Matrix, because that's what it is. It would look like the Matrix for me too. But when you configure it, it starts to look a little bit better. It looks like a story. When you have that build done, you will automatically be able to get into that useful actions point where it's easier to get to action. Now, after that, if you are guessing all the time, I think it's like a Dan Kennedy term where he mentioned this random acts of marketing that most marketing departments do. If that's happening all the time, it is because they are not using measurement and they're just guessing, right? So there are times to guess, don't get me wrong, but at least make it a focused guess in the right area so you can invest the resources in the thing that's more likely to move the needle. So go through the launch. Remember, you have to have the proper plan. You can't skip these. You got to have a good foundation. So plan it first, build it, and then you will naturally start launching and you'll get more results from your launch. So you start knowing what's coming next and you're always marketing forward. You're like, what's going to happen to the spend next week? What's going to happen to the spend the week after that? Did it happen the way we wanted it to? Okay, well, now that we've made these tweaks, what should happen to next week's spend? And you're always forecasting in the future so that you're marketing forward and you're finally got that feeling of driving through the windshield. So that's kind of the measurement marketing framework in a nutshell. It's a great slide, by the way. Take a little screenshot of if everybody wants it. So when you go through this, and then we'll go through some questions, Jeremy, if you've got them. Just a couple of notes on here. We're a training company, right? Primarily. So we train companies to do this stuff, using the strategies, understanding strategies, and of course, using the tools mostly on the Google side. But when we train it, we emphasize that there are stages to this. So in the beginning, we call the cave, right? So it's, I'm in the cave. And that's where you're wandering around in the dark. You're really not sure what's working, what's not. You're just trying to get some sort of visibility into anything at this point. When you're in a dark cave, a flashlight is an amazing source of light. It can get you out of the cave. So that's what you do, right? We get out of the cave. Then we're in what we call the valley of visibility. It's a big valley. We can do a lot of stuff. We're getting answers to questions. Do we know every single detail? Maybe not, but you know more than you did before. You're able to make progress and move forward. Think about it like a prescription of your eyeglasses. Before you had no eyeglasses at all and everything was completely blurry. You couldn't read a thing. Then you find a 10-year-old glasses that you used to use. They're the wrong prescription, but they're better, right? They at least help you. You might get a headache after a while, but at least it's better. You're making progress, at least to get to the eye doctor to get you new glasses. Then there's the summit. The summit is very complicated, right? It's where the big giant companies, a lot of people here are in the summit style. Lots of different institutions, lots of different things that are connecting, lots of different databases coming together. So it gets more complicated as you go through. But notice there's actually a little secret code in this image. And the secret code is here. They are walking, right? They are walking here. They're only doing simple things because only simple things are required to get out of the cave. So even if you're this massively complex organization and you've got locations all over the world, if technically measurement wise, you are in the cave, just do the simple stuff. Get good enough to get going, make progress. That is important. Get good enough to get going, come back and make it better later. Here in the valley, you'll notice they're not walking anymore. They're riding a bike. Well, that's indicative of the implementation of your measurement tools. So now you've got some skills. Your measurement is a little bit more complicated, right? You've got Tag Manager, you've got GA4, you've got Looker Studio, you've got BigQuery maybe coming into play a little bit. You're starting to stitch together some things, but your measurement's more complicated. You're not walking. A bike is more complicated than walking. It's got more moving pieces. It requires maintenance. You start to get the idea. Look at the Summit style, right? Summit, they're in helicopters. Incredibly complex vehicles, lots of moving parts and pieces, need a massive amount of maintenance, need lots of training in order to use them. And yet what most organizations will do is they'll see some of the fancy stuff that we show and like, I want that. Well, some of that stuff is Summit style. Some of the stuff you can't get yet because you don't have the measurement muscle for it yet. You haven't practiced the skills yet. You don't understand the tools yet, the strategies yet. And so what happens is people will build a helicopter in a cave. They're in a cave, but they want the complex answers. So they build a helicopter, and this happens all the time in organizations. Whenever you funded a lot of stuff, people buy a bunch of tools. Think about all the tools you bought that you can't get actions from. That's building a helicopter in a cave. There was no clear strategy for it, but we all busy, and yet those reports never change. They never get more useful. The department keeps screaming that they need this tool and that tool and this other thing, so you keep giving it to your data team, but you're not actually getting actions in the marketing side. That's building a helicopter in a cave. It's the strategy's gone wrong. And that happens a lot. So I wanted to sort of mention that because that's the point, is if you can't build a helicopter in a cave. And if you did, you're gonna have to dismantle it anyway. So to actually start using it. So just do the simple stuff, get good enough to get going, make progress with the framework. Then as you come back through the framework, you'll naturally have a little bit more measurement muscle, and it gets better and better and better over time. So Jeremy, does that make sense? Help me out. Speak from the franchisee's perspective, franchisor's perspective.
No, I like it. I like it. If you go back to the slide of the diagram of the framework itself, that makes a lot of sense from the standpoint of a franchise system. There are lots of audiences that you need to communicate your plan and strategy to, right?
Yep.
From the executive team at headquarters to regional teams, right? Who sit on top of groups of franchises, all the way to all the franchisees. We're actually going to a lot of our franchise customers' annual events. Most franchise systems get together as a whole company every year, and they bring all their franchisees in.
Yep.
And you've got, this framework's perfect, right? Because you have to be able to describe, what your plan is, what you're tracking, and what the results are, and what you're doing, what you're going to do to improve on that, to so many different audiences and within a franchise system, that this framework will work great for that, and really allow marketing teams to articulate that plan in a meaningful way to all these different audiences they need to speak to.
Excellent. And I will say, we've had larger organizations, right? International organizations who are starting to bring measurement to the table, even at the builds when they're building their own sites. So we had one that was they were rebuilding their entire site. So they brought us in with the web developer company they were using, and their job was to build it. Our job was to make sure that it was able to sort of phone home to the mothership and report the conversation it was having with the users, because they got this. And absolutely, you can do the same thing with the franchise system. I think it's a really good point. But measurement leading that charge is what's important, right? Having that sort of strategy as you walk through these different stages. Okay, so let's go on to move into GA4 and kind of why. We're gonna give a little bit of context for why Google is doing this to us. We are all in this superstorm when it comes to data. I mentioned it earlier, data is quickly becoming a liability. People don't want it anymore. One of those people is Google. They don't want your data anymore either, because it's a liability for them to have it in their analytics. They own Universal Analytics, right? The original Google Analytics. So they want it gone as well. That's one of the big reasons. But this is sort of the territory that we're looking at now. This is what our future looks like from a data perspective. It's messy. There's no way around it. It's going to be messy for a decade or more, because as soon as they create the laws, everybody sues everybody else. It goes to litigation. It takes years, and constantly it's changing all the time, right? So it's going to be like this. So we just have to be in a environment where the tools that we use can help us to navigate through this. Now, the superstorm is really three things. First is tech. The big one that everyone is really familiar with is when iOS and Facebook got in their little tiff back in early 2021. Facebook freaked out the world, saying Apple hates small business. And of course, that wasn't the case. It's just they don't like Facebook. So that sort of was a flex on their part. But in reality, Apple's been doing that forever. Apple changed what their Safari browser has been treating cookies and limiting cookies and all that stuff years before they flipped out Facebook. It's just that when it became Facebook's problem, they flipped out the world and everybody was aware of it. This stuff's been going on for a long time. Chrome is going to get rid of third-party cookies eventually. They're saying 2024 now, so let's say 2025 probably, but that's going away. Tech is changing how much we can measure. One way or another, the roads we are using are changing, and we can only use certain roads now. That's what's happening. So we have less ability to measure at this point. They're on the site, we won't know it. That's the challenge. Then there's laws. We already talked about that, right? GDPR, California. We got the US, is already talking about their law, and they actually brought it back sooner than people thought they were going to. This year it's happened, the last month or so. So laws are going to make it so that the data is in control of the user and not the other way around. So it used to be I could click on that Facebook like button. Facebook says, thank you very much. That's our like. We can do whatever we want with it. That is different now. Now that's still my like. I'm sort of leasing it to you. At the second I want you to get rid of it, you have to, which means they have to have control over the data, because if they don't have control over that, if they can't delete it, they're going to be in violation of GDPR and other laws. So laws are changing who's in control of the data. So then there's the users themselves, which of course is the storm that kicked off the other two storms. So users are, let's say I use Chrome right now and I don't want to be measured. Well, I'll use an ad blocker. So now you can't measure me because I'm overriding it. You don't know that, but I'll just add an ad blocker. Or I'll use Brave or Vivaldi or any of the other billion browsers that'll surely be advanced out, that'll be privacy first browsers that nobody will be measuring, right? So that's going to make it, again, less measured. So I will be on your site, but you will never know that. Well, how in the world do we deal with a platform when we're sitting here in the middle of all this, trying to figure out, like, I still got to make marketing decisions, but and even though my GA4 says I have 100 users, I don't really have 100 users. I have 1,000 users. Like, what am I going to do, right? This is the world we're all going to go in, and it's just going to get worse. Today, you're measuring, let's say, 100 users. Next year, that's probably going to be 70. The year after that, that same 100 will probably be 50 or 40. The year after that, it might be 10. It's just going to get worse. So we have to get really good at measurement, which again is why we say measurement's a department, not a project. Because if you're not ready for this, all you're going to see is your numbers dwindling and you'll have no idea how to handle it, right? So, and again, the strategies will help you with that. So building measurement muscle is super important with these platforms going through. And that's why they've created GA4, because you need control, not just of the data as it goes in, but so you can pull the data back out, because legally you're going to need to have to do that. And you can't do it with Universal. It's sort of locked down, right? You need to know the results that you're getting. You also need to know the how. We talked about results and how questions, the idea of measuring when they're aware of the journey, when they've completed the journey, as they engage along the way. You're measuring stages. This is important because we were starting to understand the conversation. You need a platform that can easily do that, which of course GA4 can. And that's the whole point of this, is Google basically said, listen, we need GA4. And I'm going to skip the one thing check, just go into the tour, and then we'll talk more about the platform here. We have this universal tool, but it's hitting its limits. And so we've been trying to improve it over time, which they were. Back, for those of you who've been around a while, you remember classic analytics, and then they upgraded it to universal. And it was a very simple upgrade. You flipped out the code on your page, you went into your Google Analytics, and it was just Google Analytics, but better. It was simple. It was an easy upgrade. Well, this is what's happening with Universal now. It's a platform that no matter how many times you fix it, has limits. It's a platform, it's a vehicle for measurement that was built for a very different world. A world where the roads were straight and narrow, a world where there wasn't a whole lot of distraction. There wasn't Internet of Things back when this thing was created, right? There wasn't, there was laptops, but there wasn't mobile phones that were accessing the internet in any measurable way. So that didn't exist. And now it's a brand new world, right? And you can go slow down this road. It's okay. But when you have this sort of territory that you have to navigate through, how do you use the old broken down vehicle? You don't. Use a new vehicle. And that's what Google did. They said, okay, Universal's done. No matter what, we can't put all this fancy stuff in it. That frame isn't going to handle it anymore. So we have to improve it from scratch. We have to rebuild. Still a vehicle for measurement, right? Just like this is a pickup truck versus the other one. Still both vehicles. This vehicle is made with all sorts of fancy features, right? It's got all the bells and whistles. It's like that old Back to the Future, right? It's where we're going, we don't need roads. Like, this vehicle will get you no matter where you want to go. It doesn't need a road, right? And it's got all these extra features on it, some of which you may never use. But as you navigate through, you don't know what you're going to run into, so you want to have them. And that's GA4. Lots of bells and whistles, lots of cool features. Some of them you may never need, but they're there for you because they might help at a certain point if you get into a rough spot as you're navigating through this new world that we've got to get into. It is built to survive the future. It's built not only for today, but for tomorrow. And remember, Google, of all these companies that run the internet, Google has the best vantage point because they own most of it. They own the roads. They own Gmail. They own Google Calendar. They own Google Maps. They own, obviously, analytics. They own so much stuff, right? All the chat stuff they're doing, all the assistants that are out there listening to everybody. They own all of that. They know, they have Nest. They know that people have Internet of Things. They have their own products that are Internet of Things. They understand that people want to start connecting. They have the Play Store. They've got Android. They get it. So they're building a platform that can connect all of that, plus whatever they see is coming down the pike in 20 years. So that's sort of what the idea is as they're coming through, getting through this superstorm, right? That's our future. And this is why they've created this particular platform. So to go into this, and then we can dive into any questions. So feel free to stop me at any point if you want there. But we're going to go in and kind of show a little bit. I wanted to introduce what Google Analytics 4 looks like, because if you haven't seen it, it is shockingly different. So the way to think about this is GA4, Google Analytics 4, is completely different than Universal Analytics. The only thing it shares in common is the name Google Analytics. That's it. That is it. Everything else is different. And this is a huge mistake that Google's been making. They keep telling people it's an upgrade, which in theory it is, but it's not an upgrade like it was before. And that's the difference. Classic to Universal, you just flip out a piece of code, you come into your same Google Analytics, and it's just whatever you did yesterday, but better. This is a completely different platform, built completely differently, works completely differently, measures completely differently, defines everything differently. So it has nothing in common with Universal Analytics. But when they tell people it's an upgrade, when they tell people, hey, we're going to configure your account for you, people go, oh, that's good. That's horrible, right? That's horrible. That cannot happen. Don't let that happen to you. Even Google says, please don't make us do this for you. We will if we have to, but don't. So get into GA4, start practicing it, because it has a learning curve. And that's shocking to a lot of people, because they're making the assumption that, hey, we'll wait till July 2nd and then we'll just use the new version. But they don't realize how different it is. So the way it's essentially organized, and this is how I think about it. And I like it. Again, it's a good thing. So we're looking at the demo store that they've got here. The way I think about Google Analytics 4 is it's really kind of 4 analytics programs in one, little SaaS programs, if you want, right? So which is nice. So they call these things workspaces on this nav. So there's currently 4 different workspaces, but room for more. And these have changed over time. They've changed some of these and adjusted some of these, because it's obviously growing as a tool itself. But this first sort of version, it's all accessing your data, but it's displaying it in different ways for different purposes. So the home section, this little home thing, again, I think of as like a little SaaS software. And all it does is go into my data set and pull up like 30 miles high. That's what it does. So it's 30 miles high, looking down. What are the general trends? Are things going up or down? Not really anything specific I could do. These things are called cards, and each of these cards have sort of headlines, right? So it's nice. They've got some AI coming through there. They're going to suggest different reports you might want to look at, but it is very, very, very high level. In my opinion, it's just to the point of not being useful, but you got to start somewhere, right? So it's 30 miles high. You just really can't take meaningful actions when you're looking at it that far away, but at least you've got something, right, coming through. So that's the home. The more useful one is the reports workspace, right? So we click into reports, you see the whole thing changes. This is why I think about it like, it's a different SaaS now, accessing the same data, but now it's doing it in a different way. This is more like 1,000 feet high. So you're not on the ground yet, but you're 1,000 feet high. You're looking down. You can see a lot more details. Instead of just seeing big, giant countries and green, you start seeing trees at that point. You can see a little bit of details. What's a forest? What's a desert? That sort of stuff. So in this, it basically breaks down into going through the different life cycle. Think, again, user journey. So you've got, how did we acquire the users, which is really kind of nice, because it actually measures original acquisition traffic source automatically on its own. And it has each individual session, the traffic source for the different sessions. It measures as they engage. In other words, what are the activities that they've done on the page, right? What they call events. Everything is called an event in GA4. And then they talk about the results. Okay, what are the results of all those activities? That's the monetization feature coming through, the reports, kind of like e-commerce, things like that. Then you've got the user question. So who are our users, right? Tell me about the users. Well, I want to know demographically. So think interest, age, gender, that sort of stuff. And then tech, what are they using? What's the tech that they're using? And this is where you can go into mobile versus tablet, desktop, browser, all that fun stuff is kept in here. And they all roughly look the same. There's some nuances, but roughly they always have. So I'm in the traffic acquisition report right now, again, answering where are our users coming from. And so we can see down here, I see little trends, but in the table, those of you in Universal Analytics familiar with the source medium report, this is the closest thing to it. So you can see there's our default channel. They have a lot more channels, right? This cross network, organic social. There's a lot more channels that exist now. And then it still has quantity of how much did I get? What's the engagement coming through? And then what are the results of that engagement? And I can tie it to a specific conversion. If I want to see like which ones are causing purchases, I can easily do that. And see that. And so most of these reports work pretty similarly to that as they're coming through. So they're easy to start finding your trends and patterns. In other words, if you're trying to listen to the conversation, it's a way to do that here. So that's the reports. Now, Explorations. This is the explore section. Now, the whole interface just changed because I'm in a different workspace. Again, think about like it's a different SaaS tool. This one is ground level. This is, I need to get into the weeds and I need to be able to see stuff. And I'm asking very specific questions that relate to my brand. And I need to get answers specific to that. So you can create, I'm just going to pull up somebody else's. Actually, let's pull up somebody's that might have some stuff in here. I take that back. Let me go back here. I'm going to pull up this. So this is an example of a funnel. So you can build a very quick funnel report if you're trying to measure for a specific user journey coming through. So I can see, a little free form report coming through in this case of funnels, of the device types coming through. And I said it was a funnel. It's not, it was clicking free form. This is the funnel just to show it to you. So completely different thing now, what they call a different technique. This is funnels. So if you're trying to measure through your journey, you want to see drop off at different points. For those of you who are thinking, yeah, that's great, but I want to know if somebody started here, where did they go? Where did they go from there? Where did they go from there? That's path exploration. They used to be called flow reports in Universal Analytics, and it does that sort of stuff. So you see the different paths that people are going through as well. So you have all of these different explorations that are here, and there's more. So you can go in the template gallery, you have segment overlap, you can get into the cohorts if you're measuring groups across time. You've used lifetime reports. Again, take that with a huge grain of salt because it's only GA4's version of what your money is, not actually what the money is that you've made. But you get the idea. This is ground level. You're in the data building these reports to answer very specific questions so you can take the very specific actions you plan to take. And then you've got advertising. This is where you're looking at the fruits and flowers. Right? You're on the ground, you're looking at the fruits and flowers now. What's the results, the things I really care about, and how did that happen? So you come up here, you would choose the conversion that you care the most about. Let's say it's a purchase at this point. And then this is where all those channels come into play. That says, oh, here's how they're all working together to create that particular conversion. So you can try to adjust it. For those of you in a multi-touch attribution, you can change all the attribution models that you're playing with. First click, last click, compare and contrast. You can see conversion paths, how all the different channels and sources have come together to create the results. And there's different ways to use these too, but that's kind of the idea. So home is all about that mile high, 30 miles high. Reports is all about that 1,000-foot high. Start to see some details, but still general trends and patterns. Explorations are ground level. And then advertising is just focusing on the fruits and flowers, right? Just the stuff you really wanted to happen and how did that stuff come through. The other big change in GA4, and then we can go into any questions here to kind of tackle the rest of it, is how it's organized. In Universal Analytics, many of you that are in the back admin, you notice there's a big giant thing here that normally is the views. They do not exist in GA4. There are no such things as views. So the way it's organized is you still have your accounts, which you will. You still have your property, only it's a GA4 property, so there's different settings here. And then in that property, you have what they call a data stream. So you create a stream. In this case, they've got a stream for their website. Now I'm going to go into our account really quickly just so I can show you. Since I'm an admin in ours, I can show you the behind the scenes stuff. In data streams, you can create different data streams. We have created one data stream for the public. We've created another data stream for our internal team traffic, so it does not mess up our numbers. That's a little pro tip there. But you can, and we don't have apps, but you could. If you have an app for iOS or Android, you can create a data stream for your iOS app. You can create a data stream for your Android app. And this is what's cool. All these data streams flow into the same property, meaning they're all going into the same reporting structure. So you can start seeing the crisscross between, did they create an account on the app and then come in and buy something on our website? Or did they create the account on the website, click the link to download the app? Did they actually do it and create an account on the app? You can start to see that crisscross in between things when it's set up properly, when you've got your implementation. So it's some really strong features that are backed up with GA4. And we haven't even tackled the overall the platform, because obviously we don't have time to do that here, but hopefully you've already got an understanding of, okay, this is very different. There is a learning curve. There's some really cool nuanced features that we've got to start learning as we get into GA4. So with that, Jeremy, what questions do you have?
Thank you,
We go into
Mercer.
some details.
No, this is great. You touched on a lot of big things that GA4 is in fact, it's not an upgrade, it's an entirely new app. But where you just were, I'm going to jump right in because we've got 7 minutes, and so we've got
Perfect.
some time for some great questions that not only I have, but I can see folks asking. So the data streams, this points out something that's really important, which is, and it's important to franchises because, as you can imagine, think of a lot of franchises of, right? They pizza shops, hair salons, they have website and web presence, and they also have apps, right? There's most most service-based organizations are using apps. So it's really nice that you can actually you can report on data across both. So just to be clear, though,
Right.
what you're showing here and what you just said is I would be able to come in here as a franchise and do reporting across both a website and an app in
Exactly.
the
So,
same
so see
report.
what I'm doing here, just to show you the example. So I created a report, right, where it's filtered for a particular stream. And you can adjust that as you wanted, right? So that's what's kind of nice about this. I can create a report, say, this is the stream that is public. And then I can create another report. It's something called the library that's available. See down here, it says acquisition. So here, this is basically the same report, but it's internal traffic. And you see, here's the internal traffic coming through. So and you'll notice that internal traffic is coming through all these other traffic sources. So it's like they weren't tagged properly, but our system is going, okay, they're internal. So we're pulling them out of the numbers, so our team doesn't influence stuff. But you can create those filters to do that. The trick is getting it tagged in so that when that information goes into GA4, it knows which stream it's coming through. And as long as you know that, you can segment it, you can pull it out, you can build comparisons, you can separate them out in BigQuery if you needed to, like all the advanced stuff that needs to happen. That's how we think about GA4. It's like a big behavioral database. So we got to make sure that the data is going in, all these behaviors are being recorded in a way that I can pull them out later. And that's why everybody's like, oh, I'm fear of missing out. I gotta record everything. If you haven't thought about how you're going to use it, you don't know how to record it. So you can't pull it out later. That's why it's important to only record the stuff that you're going to take actions on. But that's just an example of some stuff you can do. Absolutely, you can do that.
Yeah. And the framework you laid out is really important for a couple of reasons. One, I kind of look at Universal as kind of a plug and play analytics tool. Basically, I really didn't have to think about it. I went in, there was a ton of canned reports.
Right.
I didn't really have to stop and think like, geez, do I have to set up a report? Right? But in GA4, there are not a bunch of canned reports. It's actually more of a framework that you actually have to go in.
They make you participate.
Framework you described. Yeah. So that's really important to note that, again, if you're, it's a steep learning curve. There are not a bunch of canned reports just sitting in there waiting for you to go in and do. Now, I've heard you talk about on other webinars and stuff. You can still find what you're looking for. Everybody's fearful of like, well, I heard the bounce rate isn't in there anymore. And, and you can't find impressions and things like that because everything's an event. That's not necessarily true. I've seen you in other webinars. Where
they're all behaviors. And that's why I wanted to point up like this events list here, right? So everything in so in Universal, they called everything a hit, right? Coming from the old hit counter days. Now it's all events, right? Which is what Facebook and everybody else talks about, the event that's happened. All the event is the behavior that I've measured for. So you can see in our events list here, the type of events that we're recording. And this is what's really cool about the platform is you can make them whatever you want. They have automatic events they collect, like page views when a page loads, but they also have recommended events like a purchase, because not everybody has e-commerce. So a purchase may or may not be your business model. But then they have custom events. You can just literally create whatever you want that's specific to your brand. So for us, we have the Academy journey, right? We have the Measurement Marketing Academy. It teaches all this stuff. This is the event we fire into GA4 when somebody is aware. Let me go back to that. So when they are aware of the Academy, we fire this event. When they have completed the Academy journey, we fire this event. As they engage along the way, we fire this event. And you can see all the different products and services that we have where they have different user journeys coming through. But you have other things that you can do, like this, when they click on something, that's an event. When they viewed a calendar, that's an event. So you start thinking beyond just generic page views, which is kind of what Universal trains you to do, and thinking about more human behaviors. And you go, well, how would I measure that behavior? And then, okay, I would measure it. I would call it this. And here's the different parameters and details that describe, like, for example, when they become a lead, right? If I come back through here, let me see, I'm just expand this out a little bit. So if I come back here, we've got generate lead as an event. Well, I can push through as a parameter, an additional detail. What type of lead? Was it the white paper? Was it my checklist? Was it the video series? What type of lead was it? So I can answer, is that a valuable lead to get? Right. So you think about how this information goes in, and then it just comes down to your skill set. How do you have the skills necessary to put it into the tool? But the beauty of this platform is you can customize it for your own story. I don't necessarily need to go into your Google Analytics, yours, and I shouldn't be able to figure out everything. Not day one. I should be able to go in, just like if I gave you mine and said, hey, I need you to show me all this stuff. You're like, okay, wait a second. First question, what does Academy Aware mean, right? Because that's a brand thing for us. So I have to teach you that as part of our brand. Once you understand it, then you can really unlock the power of the tool. And I think this is one of the most underutilized features, is pushing through all these different custom events. Did they schedule their haircut? Did they walk in the door? Did they try to become a recurring subscription, right? Are they on our save on shipping offer? Did they use the coupon? Like all the different events that we want to happen, you can measure in GA4. And the beauty of the web version is there are unlimited event names. So you aren't limited. And on iOS and app, you can only have 500 different event names, which is enormous. I don't know anybody that's got, I mean, we have a ton and we only have 50, right? 54. I mean, 500 is a lot. You can do a ton with this. And that's the thing that people aren't taking advantage of. But they can't to start. Remember, that's building a helicopter in a cave a little bit. Because if you try to do that, you're going to overwhelm yourself because you don't know the basics. But when you get the basics in, get your page views, figure all this stuff out, how to use the platform, then you start stair-stepping it and you just constantly make progress. So good enough to get going, come back and make it better later. And that's how the whole thing works.
I love it. And right on the 1 hour mark. Well done. That was a lot of information to go through. And I do, just before, that is the exact slide I wanted to get up on the screen. So I do want to thank Jeremy, Mercer. Thank you so much for going through. I mean, this is a lot of information. I know it's really important for, especially in the franchise industry, franchisors and franchisees need this information. So I'm just going to make this full screen here. So anyone watching this, and especially those who are going to be emailed this recording after the fact, along with the blog of the summary of the conversation, this QR code Mercer set up. So if you want to follow up for more information, helpful tools, any other follow-up questions that you might have, really great resources
and just
in there.
One quick aside, this will also give you access to the strategy course. We have a strategy. It's called All About the Measurement Marketing Framework. It's about a 3-hour course. It's a deep dive into measurement strategy. We give that away for free for this level.
Amazing.
So everybody here can take advantage of that. And like I said, more power to you. It's the most useful part of measurement is understanding strategy. So we try to teach that for free.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for making that available for our viewers here. And I'll put us all up one more time. I just wanted to thank you too for taking your time this morning. And for those of you who did get this in the on-demand format, just keep an eye out for our next webinar as a part of this series. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Victoria. Mercer,
right.
Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it. Really good information.
Thanks again for having me.
Wonderful.
Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Have a good day.